behind you. Thank you, Richard. Fantastic panel. It's an absolute joy to be here. You could be forgiven for considering that the title of this next panel, How Sovereign Wealth is Reordering the World, is somewhat hyperbolic. But the idea that with managed assets worth more than $10 trillion in 2021, how and where the capital of sovereign wealth funds is invested merits discussion, is why we are doing this panel today. My panel is well positioned to do just that, including, as it does, perspective from two sovereign wealth funds here in the Gulf, the Minister of Economy here in the Kingdom, together with leading US and European private banks and funds. So let me introduce my panel here today. His Excellency Faisal Alibrahim is Minister of Economy and Planning in Saudi Arabia. His Excellency Khalid Rumaihi is the CEO of Bahrain's sovereign wealth fund, Mumtalakat. Bill here is the CEO at Standard Chartered. Nicolas Dufourcq is the CEO of France's public investment fund, Bpifrance. Ken Moelis is founder, chairman of the board of directors and CEO, long title, Ken, of Moelis and Company. Rania Nashar is head of compliance and governance at PIF. And Franck Petitgas, good to have you, sir, is CEO at Standard Chartered. Right. In light of the fact that we only have 35 minutes and we've got 7 of you on the panel, I want to start with a very brief assessment, if you will, of the current geopolitical and economic headwinds that we face. And, you know, our guests here, the participants, will be aware of what those are. I just want to get a sense from you guys and a forecast for 2023. I'm going to ask you for sort of 60-second answer on that. Sir.
Sure. So thank you, Becky. I think if you look at the global economy, challenges have been more complex and more volatile recently. If you look at the GCC, you have some of the countries that have the least volatility and the least fragility. If we take a closer look at Saudi, we came out of COVID at 3.2 in terms of GDP percent, but also this year we're projected to grow at 7.4 to 8%, depending on who you talk to, and the OECD looks at it and says 9.9%. Our real challenge is diversifying our sources of growth. One good indicator in that direction is our non-oil GDP. Non-oil GDP in Saudi Arabia has grown at 6.1% in the last quarter. That's very much the highest in 11 years, but still below our ambition and targets. Still more to be done, still more to be achieved. Unemployment has gone down significantly in Q2. We have one of the lowest Saudi female unemployment rates in 21 years, actually the lowest, and the lowest male unemployment rate since recording statistics. So in summary, the region and Saudi offer a very safe place for investments that are long-term and focusing on long-term value creation, especially Saudi being the fastest growing economy this year.
Absolutely. An extremely influential G20 nation. Bill.
I'll echo everything His Excellency said about the region and Saudi in particular. It's booming, as we can see and we can feel through these few days. The rest of the world is extremely gloomy, and if you only read the press or listened to the IMF or listened to the pundits, you'd think that we were all doomed. I don't think that's the case. I think there are some signs of encouraging renaissance post-COVID. Start with the amount of growth that we see in Asia. China, of course, is suppressed by COVID-related lockdowns and the like. There are some other problems as well, but broadly, I mean, China still grew 3.9%, which would be quite a good number in most parts of the world in the third quarter, and the outlook is bright. The rest of Asia booming, India booming, US remarkably resilient. Europe, of course, is having a very tough time. But when you balance it all out, I see, of course, there are difficult times ahead with inflation hitting full force, with interest rate impacts coming, with central banks organizing a slowdown in growth. But there's plenty of signs for encouragement as well. So on balance, I'd say, yeah, it's appropriate to be cautious right now, but the gloom arguably is overdone.
Thank you. And we're going to get what I think is going to be a really interesting perspective from those representing the Gulf entities here and those representing Europe and the US. Sir.
Good afternoon, first of all. I'm going to differ a bit with Bill. I think the IMF described the global economy as gloomy and uncertain in July, and 3 months later, it's difficult to argue with that assessment. I think that COVID started a supply disruption in the world. It was the way that governments dealt with COVID, with lockdowns, and I see three headwinds. One is supply chain disruption, which started with COVID but has been exacerbated by the war between Russia and the Ukraine. Second headwind is nationalist tendencies in the global economy. It started with vaccines, but now we see nationalist tendencies around technology, around minerals, around several food. And the third headwind is really the end of the era of cheap money. And with interest rates most likely going to increase, I think we are going to see challenges for emerging markets. I think we're going to see challenges for corporates that rely on debt. So my outlook, unfortunately, is gloomy for the 2023, but positive on this region. I agree with His Excellency. I think the GCC and the region, we're fortunate that we see a lot of positivity. And if I'm investing more regionally than I am internationally.
That's fascinating. Nicolas.
Good afternoon. I'm happy maybe to give a European perspective, very centered on France, because my bank is financing mostly French entrepreneurs. We had the first 9 months of France, which were really buoyant as far as the economy is concerned. For my bank, it's a growth of 30% in the first 9 months, never seen before. And of course, we are in the beginning of something which is going to change. So will it be severe? That's the question that probably most people here have in mind. As far as France is concerned, we think that we're going to have two quarters, probably Q1 and Q2, which will be very small recession, and then it'll bounce back. There is an underlying strength of the economy which is there, notably coming from technology. It's absolutely buoying on the ecosystem of technology in France. The deep tech of this country, but also of the rest of Europe, I would probably pinpoint that for the public of today. Europe has possibly difficulties today, but look at the academies of Europe, look at the deep tech of Europe. That's where the science is coming from, mostly worldwide, planetary, and it'll produce huge wealth going forward. So for those who hesitate still to invest in those ecosystems of deep tech in Europe, I would tell them, go, you can do it.
We'll talk about investment strategy off the back of these assessments momentarily. Ken, before we do that, just a quick assessment, if you will.
Well, it's good to be number 5 and still have the United States left to talk about. Look, I think the volatility we're seeing is a very interesting clash of most fiscal policy around the world. And again, I'll talk about the United States, where the Federal Reserve in June decided to pull out the fire extinguisher on inflation, and I think was just as shocked as everybody in the United States to see $1 trillion of spending come in late August. $1 trillion, by the way, has lost its meaning in the world. As I like to say, it's like throwing 3/4 of Canada, a new Canada, on the world economy. It's a pretty large amount of money. And then the Jackson Hole speech came, and I think what we have is almost a fight between fiscal policy and Federal Reserve trying to neutralize that in the inflation rate. And just an interesting fact in the United States I don't think people know about, there's so much money coming out of fiscal policy that now 20 states, remember the federal government wrote $1 trillion, 20 states are writing checks to their people as well. So California has written $40 billion of checks from the state. Now that used to be considered a lot of money for a federal government. So I think $1 trillion of fiscal spending understates why this extreme volatility in a clash between the Federal Reserve as they try to quell an economy that fiscal policy is overstimulating, and it will continue.
Rania.
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, all the challenges that we're talking about are multifaceted, and it requires even multifaceted solutions. So in PIF, we are well positioned in a way that our mandate is not only to diversify the revenue, but also to deploy income and deploy investments within the country here. So as His Excellency said, the IMF perspective on the Saudi economy is even higher than the global average. And this creates a lot of opportunities for PIF and for Saudi Arabia to attract foreign investors, as well as we put our money where opportunities are there and transfer the knowledge and innovation to the country. We have manifested that during COVID, so all the investments that has took place then were opportunities for PIF, and it's paying off. And now we are at a time where we need to invest in new sectors. So for instance, last night, the new regional carbon market company has been announced, and the auction just took place a few hours ago, where it's the largest auction for carbon credit. And I'm glad here to have Bill and Franck, because Morgan and Stanley and Standard Charter were enabler. Even Bill sits on our advisory board. And in PIF, we're not doing investments where we create only opportunities or long-term revenues, but also creating ecosystem. So for instance, the voluntary carbon market, it's not about having a trading platform, but also having an entire ecosystem, being the facilitator, the advisor, even a fund will be created, because there are untapped markets like the Global South, or in the region here, the supply is just 1%. So we are helping nations to achieve their net zero objectives.
That's fascinating. Just before I let you go and get to Franck, just for those who may not be clear, the allocations, the way this fund works is about 2/3 inward facing, a third outward facing. Would I be correct in suggesting
exactly.
that?
Yes.
So you're talking about 400 billion sort of inward facing at any one time, and great,
Exactly.
thank you. It's one of those, I've been living in the region for a long time. I've been well aware of what PIF is up to, and I hadn't actually worked that out myself properly until now. Franck, 2 questions to you. Assessment, forecast, 2023, and I think just because I got you, and it's only just happened, we had Ken talking about fiscal policy. We had the weirdest fiscal event in the UK some 3.5, 4 weeks ago, which, you know, thankfully sort of seems like a kind of bad dream now. Rishi Sunak is now the British Prime Minister, former Chancellor of the Exchequer under Boris Johnson. You're pretty well placed just to give us a sense of your assessment of that decision by the ruling Conservative Party.
Well, thank you, Becky, for that. And it's good to be the last one, and also to correct the fact that Bill is not yet the chairman of Standard Chartered and me the CEO. But that's okay. Not speaking on behalf of Morgan Stanley for a bit. So the forecast, I mean, coming out of all these interesting remarks, I just stepping back for 1 second and say that what we're living through and what you've heard about the gloominess, none of this is really surprising, because we've come from, you know, peace, prosperity, free money, to war, massive rate increases, inflation, energy crisis. So no wonder there is this moment of, you know, this sort of darkest moment before dawn, which is effectively what everybody is saying is bad, but perhaps it's so bad that, you know, there's still some hope coming. And I think no question 2023 looks a little dicey. We don't really know. I think what reading the runes, I think it's pretty safe to say that US is probably going to have some form of landing that's sort of not super soft, but a landing of sorts. Europe is obviously much more in the crosshairs of the crisis. EM looks actually, to Bill and others, Mina would not put in EM, but EM in Asia is doing extremely well, and I think will be a great source of growth and investment. And China is an enigma. So that's sort of the forecast. I think in that context, if you think about your point about this title being quite hyperbolic, I think actually it's a pretty good title, because the world is a world where you need big transformation. All the hope that we talked about, or you guys talked about, the upside is around, you know, innovation, technology, energy transition, et cetera. And that requires, you know, a lot of capital, illiquid, and long term. And I think that's where the sovereign wealth funds have a massive advantage. I think the question is whether in the next phase, if you think about this could be an opportunity, a 30 to 40 year opportunity to invest long term, you know, I can't see many funds being able to do this. So I think this could be a massive competitive advantage, a real killer app for sovereign wealth funds to deploy the capital in EM, and I personally think in Europe to accompany this big energy rejig of Europe. To your point about the UK, I think the UK, for some extraordinary reason, decided to have a Reaganomics experiment at the time when you needed effectively to restrict, monetary supply. And of course, that led to all sorts of discrepancies and distortions and a crisis, political crisis. I think it's the real risk of this UK experiment is, well, the risk is it became, I think, a bit of a canary in the mine. So most of you will read the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, will now be familiar with LDI strategies, which nobody knew anything about before. And so the canary in the mine is there are more places in the financial markets where people have placed large bets that are illiquid with leverage. And we know from the last time this is a risk. I don't think this is a risk that's like 2007 at all, because the system is much more robust. And by the way, this was one of although the IMF report was very negative on the economy, the IMF mood was very good. Financial system looked pretty robust compared to last time. Sorry, I'm quite exhausting my...
Last time being, 14 years ago. That's fine, good, great. Okay, so we've got the assessments, we've got the forecast, so let's drill down on the impact of those assessments as you see them on investment strategy from the perspective of the Middle East entities and the European, if you will, and why they differ. So let's just start. I mean, I'm going to open it up to you and Rania just to sort of walk us through where PIF is at present, both on an inward and outward-facing basis. So, strategy.
Perfect. So Rania is the PIF expert, but I'll tell you, PIF has 6 investment policy statements. It's investing internationally and locally. It's investing for financial returns. It's investing for local development. And it's also making some strategic bets. I think globally, sovereign wealth funds invest 19%, 20% locally, and then 81% internationally. PIF, as you just highlighted, does it a little bit more, just for 2 reasons. One, there is a developmental need, and that's been the true DNA of PIF in decades past. 2, the opportunities are more tilted to the Saudi story and the regional story. So that's one sense. What PIF actually helps us do in this transitionary period is crowd in the private sector, make more bold statements, make more bold investments, absorb the inefficiencies in new sectors. We have 4 new sectors relatively: entertainment, sports, culture, and tourism, from scratch. That did not materially exist before 7 years. And PIF is making investments there and in other places. As Franck also mentioned, sovereign wealth funds stand out because of their ability to think long-term and defeat the short-termism, but also to adopt a longer-term horizon and actually crowd in more investors and more investments to different investment theses. So not only are you going to help developmentally, but also you can help the world globally on many global issues and many investment themes and opportunities that we think are important. For Saudi specifically, the transition from the old economic structure to the new one, where we diversify away from oil and diversify our sources of growth, PIF is playing a big role in that, not only as an economic tool, like we mentioned, but also as a solution provider.
Do you want to pick up, Rania?
Yeah, just to pick up on His Excellency's with regards to PIF. With PIF, it's positioned uniquely where, a lot of deployment are happening towards developing untapped or undeveloped sectors. So, for example, if we talk about the entertainment, now Qiddiya will be opening in the coming few years. This is the capital for entertainment, sports, and arts. And with the level and amount of changes and enhancement and improvement of the local regulations to attract external investors, now Six Flags is investing in Qiddiya. The same thing in the Red Sea Development Company, where the tourism, for the niche tourism, is part of that. We're having now the Savvy, which is the e-gaming, e-sports. So now the economy here and in the emerging market is more attractive due to the more rules and regulations that protect investors, as well as, for instance, the recent investments that PIF is doing in India, for the digital economy and transferring the knowledge. There are investments worth $1.5 billion. The same thing, the recent investment in Egypt in the fields of agriculture, pharmaceuticals, where these collaborations are making, the world is really interconnected. So we have always to do the investments where we can transfer the knowledge, the innovation, to create sustainability in the economy. And it's part of the DNA of PIF. As long as we're doing well financially, then we have to do also well socially. So we have also socioeconomic impact regionally as well as globally through the investments that we do. So we are a main contributor to the Quality of Life program, which is one of the vision realization program. So PIF has a lot of targets towards increasing the housing ownership, towards creating jobs, where we have so far created directly and indirectly through the companies of PIF, 500,000 jobs, and the plan by 2025 to create 1.8 million jobs. And these jobs are not in terms of quantity, also quality.
Is that on track?
It's on track, and it's being tracked, and tracked actually by the National Performance System Center and also by the Ministry of Economy.
Your Excellency, you wanted to jump in?
Just one quick thing. I mean, the 2 trillion target, AUM, that's an input target. There are a lot of output targets that we're measured against as government officials, but also PIF and its own governance. I think overall, globally, sovereign wealth funds are investing more, maybe 20% in the last 3 years, more in renewables than before. Also investing in startups directly. I mean, this is something that wasn't seen in the past. We have the oldest sovereign wealth fund in Kuwait. We have one of the ones that achieved, in Norway, achieved economic diversification. And we have PIF, which is challenging many concepts. But in Saudi, you see a lot of social transformation, a lot of economic opportunities, and a lot of social responsibility. PIF, and at the intersection of these three, you have inclusive growth. PIF is playing an important role, not only PIF, the whole government, an important role in all three areas, whether it's social change with the new sectors that PIF is taking the lead on, economic opportunities, which is capturing, and social responsibility, redefining ESG, promoting today's announcement, so many things. So again, not only an economic tool, but a solution provider.
The fund was established 2016 alongside Vision 2030, right, in its current sort of structure. Yours, sir, in Bahrain, established in 2006. How was the investment strategy? Let's just sort of talk about where you are at. But I do wonder how the role of that fund has changed over the years, and how familiar or not what we are hearing from our esteemed guests from Saudi.
Mumtalakat was established in 2006 as a holding company, and assets that were owned by the Ministry of Finance were transferred to Mumtalakat. Public Investment Fund has a similar mandate when it was first conceived. And the idea is to run these companies and extract better value and to increase shareholder value. The shareholder is the government, is the Ministry of Finance. What's evolved over time is that, much like we've heard from Public Investment Fund, number one, we wanted to make sure that we were active as a shareholder, as an owner. And that is really translated in terms of the governance. How do we have the boards of these companies set up? How is the C-suite? And we challenged them and became very vocal, much like a private equity firm would do. But we have a long-term mindset. And it's changed the dynamic in which these companies are working on. We hold them to strict KPIs. We ask that they're fit for the future, their 3-year investment strategy. And this is something that Temasek has executed very successfully over time, Khazana and others, the sovereign wealth funds that are holding companies. So I think this is a component of our strategy. Investing regionally is a common theme you'll hear around sovereign wealth funds. We're no different. To be a catalyst, I think you've heard from His Excellency and Rania how the PIF is opening up new sectors. We're doing the same. We're investing in waste to energy. We're investing in healthcare. We're investing in sectors where the private sector fears to tread and where the government has to act as a catalyst. We're always conscious not to crowd out the private sector. But I think this is a responsibility that sovereign wealth funds have to aim for. I'll end by saying another important component. Internationally, we think that innovation and technologies, I think my fellow panelists have said, this is done extraordinarily well by the United States and Europe. So when we're looking at this, we're investing as an LP, for instance, in renewables, in medtech, in blockchain. We're going to learn as an LP. We're going to think about co-investing as a second level, where we suddenly sit on the board of that company, but want to sit alongside a GP. And then ultimately, all of that is about bringing that technology back home. But I think it's a process. It's too early. You first need to learn, then you need to become more active, and then you need to think about how you have that connective tissue back to the regional economy. That, in a summary, is our strategy.
Talking about crowding out, I do want to address a question as soon as we've finished this part about whether we are seeing the crowding out of the private investment bank in what is this, new and slightly different world of sovereign wealth investment. But be that as it may, Nicolas, let's just get your perspective on strategy and role at present.
Yeah, the choice that has been made in France, we were established in 2013, okay, was to put together an organization which is a bank regulated by the European Central Bank, and at the same time a sovereign wealth fund. Meaning by that we structured the organization absolutely centered on the interest of the entrepreneur. Of course, I am centered on generating results for my shareholders. But basically, the daily life of my team members is how do I satisfy my customer, which is the entrepreneur, all across the French territory, which is why we have 50 branches. And we are cropping all the deal flow of France, be it classical private equity or startups. It's also the reason why we are in the top 3 sovereign wealth fund investing in technology, because we are just ingrained in the ecosystem of all the French academies and cities. So we offer to the entrepreneurs a sort of one-stop shopping with loans, equity, consulting, innovation financing, everything. One-stop shopping, city by city in France. So it gives the possibility of a new shape, I think, of a sovereign wealth fund, which is just grounded on the territories. Now, what we are investing into is basically the future of France. It's called France 2030. So we have to achieve the metamorphosis of the society and the economy, vertical by vertical. Change agriculture, change industry, change services, change health, change everything. Through technology and through the generation of ecosystems of young entrepreneurs, which are basically revolutionary. We also finance the big groups and the big guys. We are shareholders of, I would say, half of the CAC 40. But what will change France is the cultural move, the cultural wave of new entrepreneurs, which we see every day in the country, and which is also the reason why I'm very optimistic on what's happening today. In all the regions of the country, because the metamorphosis is happening under our eyes. So we chose that scheme of a fund, and I think that was the right choice at that time. Is it complete? I think it's okay. We also finance exports through our export credit agency. All this is gathered in one single organization, which is very powerful for the country.
Bill, your perspective.
You mentioned the 10 trillion of sovereign wealth fund money. That's a huge amount of money, but it's very small as a percentage of the total money being managed in the world. But it's super high impact. It's high impact, I think, for the reasons that His Excellencies have all mentioned, which is that it's long-term in orientation. It's sort of destined for future generations. I think how the money is deployed in different sovereign wealth funds is very different, and we've already heard that just on this panel. Mix between domestic and international, very long-term versus more diversified portfolio investments. But where I think when I think about the theme of this whole conference and investing in humanity, one of the key opportunities for sovereign wealth funds is not to crowd out capital, but to crowd in private sector capital. His Excellency mentioned that several times. And that's happening in many cases. So the opportunity for long-term patient capital that could have a political or invest in humanity objective alongside it can do a world of good right now. When we think about the financing gap for transition financing to a net zero economy, we're talking about $100 trillion or something that's missing. That money needs to be identified, needs to be delivered. It can only come from the private sector in scale, but it can be catalyzed substantially through sovereign wealth funds, which is happening. We certainly see that with PIF. We see that with other sovereign wealth funds. To the extent that we can get this snowball rolling, I think we can actually solve our global climate problem. Then we can move on to the other pressing problems of inequality, poverty, et cetera. But I think there's a tremendous opportunity for sovereign wealth funds to have that kind of impact.
Frank, Ken, yes.
Well, you know, you talk about 2023, and I think we're ignoring the fact that the world is going to see an experiment, I think, come to bad fruition in front of them. And I'm thinking of the German economy, where they went to the process of the last 5 years. They decided to outsource their energy to Russia, their end market to China, their labor to Eastern Europe, their military to the United States. And I think you're about to see that experiment not work to the benefit of people. And I do think you're going to see, and again, I love being Saudi Arabia for this, because I think sometimes they say you can't ask a fish what water is about because they don't understand the concept of water because they're in it. But the world's reawakening to the fact that oil and gas is the fundamental mover of civilization forward, and what has brought the world into middle class at such a rapid level over the last 50 years. I think we've gone through a period where we've taken that for granted. I think that we've restricted capital to it. 75–80% of the financial institutions in the world are not allowed to invest in oil and gas, to the detriment of the 7 billion people who need it to reach the middle class. And I think we're about to see that, and I think it's happening real time right now as people realize how important baseload, basic energy, despite all the transition we want to happen over the next decade, to whatever we want it, we need the world, 7 billion, the world needs affordable energy to live their lives and climb the ladder. And I do think the West, and I know a lot in this room here, forget about those 7 billion people as they go back to the cocktail party in the Upper East Side and talk about energy transition while billions of people are trying to get to middle class. And again, I want to say I think the world is tilting in this direction because you've stayed focused, and energy is the lifeblood of the economy and the world civilization. I think people are going to wake up to that fact over the next 6 months.
Sir.
Me to add anything to this? I mean, maybe a point, which is I agree with you. And then the beauty of this, of course, now is that it is in the hands of those who've actually got the capital derived from the energy bonus to actually be able to, and I'm talking about the PIF and others in the Middle East and elsewhere, to be able to also affect the metamorphosis of the world. And to borrow the phrase from Nicolas, because actually that is, talking about the SWF, I think what's really interesting about the sovereign wealth funds is that from the outside looking in, or from planet Mars, you look at sovereign wealth and you say, okay, they're big, they're effectively state-owned, and in a world of capitalism, normally doesn't rhyme with efficiency, boldness, transformation, diversification. But in fact, that's actually, it's really we should put it on its head. They are the most bold, they are the most long-term, they are the ones who effectively are going to shy away from the short-termism, and I think are going to help enormously, hopefully, with what you're talking about, which is this ability to deal with the energy crisis, both making sure the investments continue, we keep the flow of energy going, as well as investing in the next generation. I go back to my point about the rejig of the entire energy system in Europe. My view is Europe in 10, maybe 20 years will be an energy powerhouse. And it will have to be, because otherwise it won't survive. And you need capital, long-term capital. So the question, where does it come from? I think it will come from sovereign wealth funds.
There is definitely a sense that this is a more sophisticated investor in this era of mega fund at present. Is this an era that crowds out the private investment bankers?
I don't think so. I think it exactly crowds in private capital because it's long-term, patient, and relatively sophisticated. So the impact of a PIF or any of the funds that we're talking about here, investing in a company or in a country, in terms of bringing in the private sector, that the credibility that comes with that is tremendously valuable. So no, I think I'm not concerned about crowding out at all. And I think we could probably do more to crowd in. I'll add to that, the other people that we can be crowding in are the multilateral development banks, who have been absolutely woeful in terms of their contribution to this fight. The sovereign fund taking a lead ahead of the institutions that are owned by the richest countries in the world. This is another huge opportunity for crowding in.
That's fascinating. I've got one more question. We've only got 30 seconds left, but I do actually think it's valuable, living as I do in Abu Dhabi and seeing the strategy of Mubadala and particularly Mubadala, if not Adia. The emergence of partnership and collaboration between sovereign wealth funds, I think, is fascinating. I'm not going to give everybody an opportunity to do this because we haven't got time, but who would just like to pick that up? I'm talking about risks and rewards here.
Sure, definitely. I think if you look at the region, the GCC specifically, the upside of economic integration and collaboration is huge. The net positive is huge, even if deltas were different sizes for different countries. And I think the sovereign wealth funds, as they collaborate, that's a great example. You can create a 1 + 1 = 3 situation. I want to go back to His Excellency's comment earlier. We have history in sovereign wealth funds in the region, but not all sovereign wealth funds globally and the region invested in taking the, let's say, endowment that they have, whether it's capital, opportunities, and access, into transforming it into institutional capabilities. I think Mumtalakat sets a great example in that area. Some of the sovereign wealth funds in Abu Dhabi, and today, I think, PIF 2016 in its new form, since 2016, is becoming a player that is not only its success factors is not only its capital, but also the investment intellect that's being developed, the partnerships, and most importantly, the cause. PIF has a clear cause to drive after, and collaborating with other entities, I think, punch over your weight.
We have run out of time. Final thought, anybody desperate for their fund? Yes, go on, sir.
Just I want to add to it.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a risk to sovereign wealth funds collaborating. I think there's only upside. We see partnerships that we've developed with Mubadala, investing internationally and locally where we share transactions. We have similar mindsets, long-term investment. With the Public Investment Fund, we've done one joint investment. I don't see the risks. I mean, we invest with general partners, and sovereign funds are becoming like general partners. They have very sophisticated investment teams, a long-term investment horizon. I think it's a good trend that I think we'll see growing in the future.
Well, I mean, when I talk about risk, I mean, let's be quite clear. There has been some significant investment by the regional sovereign wealth funds in the Russian fund, for example, which at present must be somewhat of a concern as we continue to watch that war and conflict unfold. I'm going to have to wind it up. I would love to sit here for longer. This is a fascinating conversation. I'm sure all of you, who would like to share in continuing this will be able to do so with our participants. I've got a show to do at 5 o'clock local time, so I need to get on and do that for the time being. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.